I have one question I want us to answer. Are you a goat? Not this kind of goat, okay? Are you a goat? This is what I'm talking about right here. Does anybody know what this means? I know Gavin probably does, so I'm not going to ask him. I see Emerson giving me a thumbs up. Okay, here we go. Greatest of all time. That's what it stands for. I don't know when this became so popular. It was sometime after I was in high school. But in the last 5 to 10 years, this word has become so popular in our language, specifically in conversations about who is the greatest of all time, specifically in athletics and other sort of pop culture things. And so you can go on to any talk radio show, any sports media show, any number of YouTube videos that will have content debating who is the greatest of all time. Whether it's a debate between LeBron James or Michael Jordan, that debate happens all the time. Or between Tom Brady, and it used to be Peyton Manning, but now Peyton Manning's been pushed out, and now it's Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. And sometimes these other guys slip in. Another one people like to discuss, well, who is it? Is it the Beatles or the Rolling Stones? Now, we all know the Beatles are by far superior. And that was 40 years before I was even born, so. You could go on to YouTube and you could find a debate and a video about whatever it is you're interested in, because the goat conversation is so popular because they can just take that goat picture I showed you, any goat picture, and throw it on the thumbnail with pictures of the people they want to debate, and people are going to watch because we're interested. But why? Why are we so interested in discussing who's the best? Why is it that we care so much about how other people perceive us? Why is it that we're so concerned with looking good or being impressive or being funny or being likable? Why do we care so much? Part of that reason, I think, is because we are social people. And because we're social, we want to be likable. And that is a good thing. I don't think any of us should want to be unlikable. Being unlikable is not a good thing. You don't have your life doesn't end well whenever you're not likable. A lot of things don't go well for you. None of us should want to do that. I'm not saying that we should be unlikable, but why is it that we don't want to just be likable and be someone that people like to be around? Why is it that we want to be the best? Why do we want to be on top? Now, maybe you say, I don't want to be on top. I think when we stop and we really think deep down, that's not true. We do think we're pretty good. And if it wasn't our social ceiling, the situation around us that keeps us from going higher than we'd like to go, I think all of us would be like, oh yeah, I'd take that. If I could have been the best baseball pitcher ever, I would have totally been happy to do that. And there was a time in my life where I thought maybe I could be. But I eventually learned that wasn't the case. What if you had as much money and power and the freedom to do whatever you wanted without any consequences? Would you try to be the goat then? I think we would. But what happens whenever a human actually has this sort of freedom to be able to pursue being the greatest of all time? Well, today in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 24, we get to explore one of these stories about a human who had a lot of power and a lot of wealth and very little accountability. And this person was able to try to strive to be the greatest of all time. And this is what happens. So let's take a look at Acts chapter 12, 1 through 24. In the Pew Bible, if you want to follow along, it's page 1569. It will be on the screen. Let's take a look at this passage from Acts chapter 1, chapter 12, verse 1, written by Luke. This is how it opens up. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. All right, now we need to connect chapter 12 to chapter 11. So if you were here last week, let me jog your memory. If you weren't here, I'll catch you up real quick. Chapter 11, two things that happen. First, Peter gets back from the house of Cornelius. Remember, he's a Roman soldier who's a Gentile. He goes there and baptizes them, and they become members of the church. But he's in their home. That's a no-no for Jews. Jews are not supposed to intermingle with Gentiles. So he gets back to Jerusalem. The Jewish Christians want him to explain himself. Why is it that you did this? So that happens in chapter 11. And then in chapter 11, we're told about this new community of Christians that pops up in this city called Antioch, which is north around 300 miles from Jerusalem in this region called Syria. And in this region, this church pops up, and you have Gentiles and you have Jews coming together to be a community. And then Barnabas and Saul's back again, Barnabas goes from Jerusalem and he goes to Tarsus, gets Saul, and then they're leading this community. Chapter 11 ends with Barnabas and Saul bringing support to Jerusalem because of a famine. And then Luke says here in verse 11, or chapter 12, verse 1, about this time, so what he's telling us is this is all happening at one time. These events are overlapping. There's no gap. Saul and Barnabas are on their way to Jerusalem, and this happens. King Herod arrests some Christians, one of them being James, the brother of John, who's one of Jesus' disciples, and James is executed. Now, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, okay, well, who's this King Herod? I thought King Herod already died. You know, if your brain is going there, if it's not, that's okay. There was a King Herod in the time of Jesus' birth who died soon after. Now, this is not the same King Herod. That King Herod was called Herod the Great. He was the goat of the Herods. He reigned from 37 BC to 4 AD. He was the king over all of the region of Judea. So a big chunk of land he was king. But he was technically a client king, which means that the Roman Senate said, we will appoint you leader of this region on our behalf. You will have the responsibility of maintaining order and sending us money, but you can collect taxes, you can have your own army, and we will grant you the title king. But you're not a real king. Caesar's king. But you get to be king in Judea. So after Herod died, they took his kingdom and they broke it up into pieces. Until this man, King Herod, who's technically named Herod Julius Agrippa I. Because there's an Agrippa II that we learn about at the end of Acts, who's also called Herod. There's about 6 people in the Bible who they call Herod in the New Testament. They're all different. This is Herod Agrippa I. He was the first Herod to reclaim the title king. After King Herod the first one, Herod the Great, they called him, after he died, they said no more people are called king. There's only one king. But Herod Agrippa managed to make some big friends in Rome, so whenever he had the chance to be in power, they said, okay, you can be called king again. And he also, over the 7 years he reigned, managed to reclaim all of his grandfather's land. Because he's the grandson of Herod the Great, and his grandmother was Jewish. So this means that Herod Agrippa was part Jewish. He had an actual claim to being a Jewish king. So he was a pretty big deal. The people in Jerusalem really liked him. He practiced Judaism at some level. He went to the temple. He lived in Jerusalem, and he kind of wanted to picture himself as the next Davidic king of Israel. So he was a big deal. He's going to be the greatest of all time. That's what he says. He says, if I can just live as long as my grandfather, I'm going to be the greatest Herod. And so what he decides to do, and we don't know why, is go after the Christians. 2 reasons why, possibly. First, he might have gone after them because he thought they were a threat, like a real threat to him, or he just wanted to increase his popularity rating. And I think most likely the second reason, he wanted to boost his numbers, and he knew if he defended traditional Judaism that his subjects would be happy. So he goes after the Christians, and he gets John's brother James, who's one of Jesus' disciples, but not the John or James, the son of Alphaeus, a different disciple, not James, the brother of Jesus, a James that comes up later in this chapter. This is James, the brother of John. He is executed. He's the first of the apostles who's killed after Judas. So this is what happens next. When this is Herod, saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for a public trial after the Passover. So seeing that his subjects were so happy with what happened with James, he decides to go for the big fish in the pond. He grabs Peter, who at this time was most likely the most well-known of all the leaders of the Christian church in Jerusalem. He gets Peter and he's like, I'm going to put you on trial after Passover and certainly execute him. Now again, we don't know why it is that Herod is going after Christians, but this is what Luke wants us to see. There's a human with political power that's challenging the mission of Jesus. There's a human who's trying to stop the mission of Jesus from spreading. Now, this isn't the first time that's happened. The first time was in Acts. It was the religious leaders. They tried to stop the message. They even arrested Peter, remember? And he broke out. And then there was the man named Saul who was persecuting Christians. And then he had this vision from Jesus, and all of a sudden he switches sides. And now the most powerful political leader in the region, Herod Agrippa, the appointed leader of the Roman Empire, the representative of Rome himself in the area, is going after the Christians. And this is what Luke wants us to see. Does Rome have the power to stop the mission of Jesus? Can Herod stop the mission? Can any human have the power to stop the mission? Can anything stop the mission of Jesus? Let's find out. Verse 5. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. So Peter's in prison. They start to pray that he will be delivered. That's going to come up in a minute and be important. So let's see what happens. Verse 6. The night before Herod was bringing him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. All right, so we learned right off the bat that Peter is heavily guarded. And these are professional soldiers, either Herod's army or Roman soldiers. They're professionals. These aren't the servant guards that the Sanhedrin and religious leaders had earlier. These are professionals. And this is a Roman fortress. We don't exactly know where he'd be kept. There's one option on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. There's a fortress that was a military base. That's potentially a place. There's some other spots in Jerusalem. It doesn't say. But he is in a place where humans aren't getting out. So what I think about today is if we imagine this solitary cell in the belly of a prison, there's a guard outside of it. There's 24-hour surveillance with security cameras. And then in this facility, there's layers and layers of hallways and doors, each guarded. And then you get outside this facility and there's a yard, and there's guard towers and spotlights that are guarding this facility. And then there's a barbed wire fence around the outside, patrolled by guards with dogs. This is the scenario that Peter's in. No one's getting out of this place. Unless maybe you're friends with the Avengers. I don't think Peter was friends with the Avengers, but he did have maybe a more powerful friend, right? Can God rescue Peter? Verse 7. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Quick, get up, he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, put on your clothes and sandals. And Peter did so. Wrap your cloak around you and follow me, the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and the second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen. In a scene that's unexpected, Peter walks out of the prison like he's taking an afternoon stroll through the park. The chains fall off, doors open, Guards either don't see him or they're sleeping and don't wake up. They better not be sleeping because then they're in trouble. But they don't see him. He walks right by. Just like that, Peter is free. And with Peter's rescue, Luke returns to this constant theme. When Jesus wants his mission to be carried out, nothing can stand in the way. Not even the might of the Roman Empire. No one can stop the mission of Jesus. This is what we must remember. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. Listen very carefully. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. God was going to see that Peter got out of that prison, and he did. And so this is what Peter does next. Then with his hands, when this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the door, or the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter's at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet, and he described how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. "Tell James, the brother of Jesus," not James, the one who was executed, "and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then he left for another place. Now this is an interesting story, but remember, we're told in verse 5 that the Christian Jews were praying for Peter to get out. And so Peter goes to the house where he might think they're at, and the servant girl is so excited that she doesn't open the door. But nobody else believes her. They're like, "He's not here." And then they're like, "Oh, it must be his ghost or an angel. It's not him." They are praying for him, and they don't believe that he will get out. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. But how often do we doubt God? How often do we lose hope that he could still work in a situation that we might seem as humanly impossible? Nothing can stop God's mission from God seeing his mission to fruition. This is an important question for us to ask Salem Magley. You know, I know we can look around and see that we weren't what we were 60 years ago. I know we can have funerals where this place is full and remember those days. And you know, I want those days to be back. But no matter who and what we are, do we believe that God can and will work through us? Do we have the faith that he can act if we ask? Because those Christians asked and God acted and they were surprised. But can we have the faith to believe that nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition? And can we ask? Those Christians were surprised. But what about Herod? Verse 18. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become to Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. So Herod was not happy because his plan had been thwarted, his power had been challenged, because nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. And while the early church maybe had faith that God could act but didn't believe he would, well, Herod was certain that he had the power to stop the mission of God. He had the might of the Roman Empire. He was on his way to being the greatest of all time, the best Herod, greater than his grandfather. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. And Herod found that out the hard way. And this still rings true in the halls of governments around the world today. No human power or authority can stop the mission of God. Now, Luke could have ended the story there. But he interestingly decides to include one more little detail, one more story about Herod and his encounter with the God of the universe. Now we continue. This is the end of chapter, verse 19. Then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. He had been quarreling with some people from Tyre and Sidon, and they now joined together and sought an audience with him. After securing the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not of a man." Now, Luke tells us this pretty matter of fact. But we have another account of this event from a man named Josephus, who was a Roman or Jewish historian from the same period. He was writing for Romans. He was not writing for Jews. He was not writing for Christians. He was not a Christian. He's just reporting what happened. And this is what he tells us about this event. He said that Herod Agrippa was in Caesarea. Now, Caesarea was a town we heard about. It was on the coast. It was further north of Jerusalem. It was a capital city sometimes. Now, remember, Herod Agrippa, his capital city was in Jerusalem. But there was a palace there, and there was this theater that Herod the Great had built there. And so Herod Agrippa is in this theater for a holiday to the Roman emperor. And he gets up and he has this garment made of pure silver. He stands up in the sun and he gives this speech. And his clothing shines with a massive glory. The people there are in awe and they say to him, "Certainly this is someone who's more than mortal." So what they're saying is they're praising him as a god. The way Luke puts it simply is that this was the voice of God, not a man. But people say, surely Herod Agrippa is more than a man, he is a god. Now in the ancient world, Caesar would receive praise like this, and it was okay. He would happily receive it. He expected everybody under him to humbly decline, to say, "Oh, thank you, you're so kind, but I'm just a mortal like you." But Herod Agrippa, he's like, "I'm the greatest of all time. Of course I'm a god." And this is what happens. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. Now, Luke basically says he died right on the spot. But this is what Josephus tells us. While Herod is giving this speech, he is struck with pain in his stomach. And they take him to the nearby palace that's there, a different place for him to stay. He dies 5 days later. He was in his 50s. Now that's older for that time. But he's in his 50s. He'd reigned for 7 years. And he has this sudden death. And this is what Josephus does. He attributes his death to his hubris because he did not decline that praise. Now Josephus does not attribute the cause of death to God. He just says because of his hubris, he died an early death. But this is what Luke says. He says that God struck him down. And then Luke says this, "But the word of God continued to spread and flourish." Now this is what we need to see. This is the climactic ending to the first part of Luke's story. We've seen the message go out and out and out. We've seen opposition and opposition, and now it gets to this point where the highest official in the region stands in opposition to the mission of God. And then he tries to make himself a god. And what is it that God does? He says, "No, you're a human like the rest." And he strikes him down. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. And just like that, the fake, politically savvy, appointed king of Israel from the Roman Empire falls. And the one true king of the Jews is lifted up, Jesus of Nazareth. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. So up until this point, we've seen the message of Jesus go throughout Judea, into Samaria, all the way to the northern part of this region called Syria, to the city of Antioch. But Jesus said that his mission would go to the ends of the earth. And Luke is now in a position to tell that story. He's shown that the political powers in Judea cannot hold on to the mission of God and stop it, because nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. Herod Agrippa is just one in a long line of human political leaders throughout history who's tried to say that they can replace or stand in the place of God. But as Luke has made very clear throughout this beginning part of the gospel, nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. So this is a major juncture in the story of Acts. The mission of Jesus has been spreading because of Jesus and his power. Yes, he's using his followers, but it's through the power of Jesus that the mission is expanding. Nothing can stop the mission. Nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. This is what we need to ask ourselves. Do we believe this? Do we believe that Jesus can work through each and every one of us? Do we believe that he wants to work through each and every one of us to bring his mission to fruition? Do we believe, as this little community that we call Salem Magley Church, do we believe that God would want to see his mission brought to the world through us? I believe he does. Do you? Our challenge is to be like the Christians who prayed for Peter, but to hold on to that hope that God can and will act. Because nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. And then with Herod, we're reminded that we can't look to any human political leader to solve our problems ultimately. At best, they are inadequate stand-ins for the real thing. And when they try to stop God's mission or replace it with their own mission, they always fail. Because nothing can stop God from seeing his mission to fruition. So we've seen the mission of Jesus make its mark on Judea. But the question becomes, will it make its mark on the whole Roman Empire? Next week, we get to see how that story unfolds.